let's have a look at moving objects in the 3D Tiny House Designer. To get started, I'm going to show you how to move objects on the exterior. So I'm going to enable my exterior walls here again by clicking the Enable and Disable Exterior Walls button. And I'm going to go and select this exterior door here. This is just a quick good example from the previous lesson with selection layers. Sometimes the doors and walls overlap, so I'm going to deselect my walls here, so it's going to be easier for me to select my doors. There we go, and I will left click on this door here to select it. And what you will see now, you will have a couple of different options to move this door. And the first option that I will be showing you is the Dimension Move tool. So you will see these callouts here around the door that will show you the distance from the corner of the tiny house to the end of this door, and also the same thing with the distance to the trailer, and then the distance to the top of this wall here as well. So these are not just callouts that show you the distance, you can actually use them to move objects. And this will make it really easy to make sure that everything is centered nicely and you don't have any funny dimensions in your design. So let's say I want to move this door to the left by another 400 millimeters, meaning that this gap here will be 1000 millimeters. Of course, you can convert this into inches and feet if you're using the imperial system. I'm going to now type in 1000, which will make this a 1 meter gap. And now it will automatically move it to be a gap of exactly 1000 millimeters. So this is super handy. When you're moving an object, let's say like a door, you always want to make sure that the door is smack bang on the trailer or the foundation and you don't have a little gap in between. So if, for example, you have a gap like this here, it will show you that you have a bit of a gap, and you can remove that by clicking on the gap essentially and then typing in 0, which will bring it back down to have no gap in between here. So you've already seen me move use the other movement tool here, which is the Gizmo, and you can use these arrows here to move the door as well if you want to free move the object. So let's say I want to move this door to the right here and I don't want to exactly type in my dimension. So let's say if I'm still planning my tiny house, this might be quite handy. All I need to do is hover over this arrow here and you will see that it becomes highlighted. Then I left click and drag, and this will now move it on the axis that the arrow is pointing in. Just as a quick tip, what you can see here, my mouse cursor is over the wall. If you have the mouse cursor on the ground, it will not move it. So always make sure that whatever you're moving it on, it is over the object that you're moving it on, rather than on the ground somewhere here. Otherwise, it will not move. And I can do the same thing with moving it up and down as well, like this. And you can also free move the window on the facade here as well. So you can move it to the top and the right at the same time, or the left, of course. And I will just click this free move button here, left click and drag, and now you can see it can go anywhere on the facade. So I'll just pop it back in somewhere here on a random spot on the facade, and I will make sure that there's again no gap in the middle between the door and the trailer here. Click on it, type in 0, and that snaps it back down to the bottom. Just as a quick tip, when you're designing your exterior, what you will see here, this callout picks up on the end of the wall, which connects to the next part of the wall. So essentially this is where the structural bit here begins, and you shouldn't probably put any more of your exterior here or more of your doors here. So I would go in and let's say I want this to be 600 millimeters away from this gap here. But to understand how big this gap here is, you just need to think about how big the thickness of your wall is, and I will get back to that in a second when we look at the shell. Alright, so that's how you would move doors, and the interior items work basically the same. So I'm going to click on enabling it, or in this case disabling the exterior walls, so I can have a look at my interior. And let's say I want to move this table here. I will click on this table with my left click again, and it will show me exactly how far this table is away from this bench seat here, for example. If I want to have a 400mm gap in here, I would click on this gap and type in 400mm, and this will move it for me. And the same thing works with cabinets. Of course, with cabinets, you always want to make sure that you're moving things accurately and there's no gap in between different cabinet pieces. So let's say I will move this cabinet using my free move gizmo here. You will see that there are now gaps in between, let's say, this cabinet and this cabinet. So I'll just quickly select it again to reactivate my dimensions. And I don't want to have a gap in between the interior wall and the cabinet. So I'll click on this again here and then type in 0. And now you will see there's again no gap in between here. But now we also want to remove this gap in between that I just created. So I'll just click on this gap with my left click and type in 0, and this will snap it back together. So when I design tiny houses in the 3D Tiny House Designer, I usually place things somewhat accurate to where they need to be, and if I can't quite figure out the last gap, I always then just say, okay, I don't want to have a gap in here and no gap in here, and this will make it much easier for me to make my cabinets align. All right. And just as a last thing when it comes to movement, of course we have lofts as well. So let's say if you want to place something different on top of this loft here, let's say if I want to move this cabinet from the bottom to the top here, I would click on the free move gizmo here and then left click, and of course hold my left click down as well, and then just hover my mouse over the loft. And the same thing applies with what I just said for the exterior. If you're hovering your mouse over the loft, it will keep it over the loft. If you are hovering your mouse over the exterior, it will not move it. And if you then move it over to the bottom floor again, it will snap it down to the bottom floor. So whatever you're moving it on, just hover it over that specific area, if that makes sense. All right, I'll just quickly move it back down, and just for the sake of it, make sure that there's no gap in between the interior wall and the cabinet and the two different cabinets here. All right, that's how you move things in the 3D Tiny House Designer.